Moving on to question number 7 on the January 2026 Biology Regents Exam in New York State, questions 28 through 32. This cluster focuses on honeybees, and you have some reading on the beginning about honeybees and their behavior. This is focused on their group behavior, which is one of the standards. You see a swarm there of honeybees. After reading that introduction, which solution could a community use to most effectively reduce, again, in italics, meaning that's an important word, to reduce the impact of human activity on honeybees? Looking at the choices, 28, apply herbicides to limit the growth of plants. We should know that herbicides can affect other organisms besides the plants, and so those herbicides might impact the bees, so we're not going to be choosing choice 1. Create gardens and public spaces with native flowering plants. Sounds like a good idea. We know that these bees use those native flowering plants, so that makes sense. Create an enclosed space around the hive so bees will be unable to leave the area. And so when we look at it, the whole point here is the group behaviors of bees going out to find new food sources is important. So 3 would prevent that. That's incorrect. And 4, apply pesticides to eliminate other insects. Same as number 1, that pesticides can impact the bees. And so, yeah, the correct choice here for 28 is 2. Give yourself a point if you got it correct. Here we have some description of something bees use to communicate, the waggle dance, and you have a description. It tells you about how bees can interpret this dance, and the dance is meant to communicate where a food source is. If you analyze and read over all that information. When we look at question 29, based on information, how does the waggle dance of an individual have an effect, a beneficial effect on the entire hive? So based on all of that reading and based on the graphs, you want to look at those choices. Being able to communicate through the waggle dance allows bees to find other hives and share resources. No, this is about a single hive finding more resources. 1 is incorrect. 2, being able to communicate through the waggle dance allows bees in a hive to avoid predators. No, this is about food. It's not about predators. So 2 is incorrect. 3, being able to communicate through the waggle dance allows bees in the hive to gather resources more efficiently. Okay, that sounds good. That sounds like what this graph and the date information was showing. So we'll keep that on the table. And number 4, being able to communicate through the waggle dance allows bees in the hive to recognize which plants are food sources. No, it's about where the food sources are, not about recognizing plants. Answer's 3. Go ahead and give yourself +1 in the margin if you got it correct. So we move on. We start talking about this mite, which is a parasite of the honeybee. You have some reading information. Then you have a graph. This is using oxalic acid to treat and try to reduce these mite populations to help protect bees. And we see the data. We have treatments before treatment, and then we have several days after treatment. Our y-axis tells us the population of the mites. So pre-treatment population was here, like 13-ish. After treatment, population declined significantly, but then 18 days later, it had been climbing back up to its pre-treatment population. Okay, so sounds similar to a previous cluster. Question 30 is about using information to circle what would happen to the population of bees that are affected by the mites and the treatment. Okay, so when the mites are introduced, they are parasites of the bees. Would that cause the bee population to go up or down? Sort of seems like common sense, but the bee population goes down, so you would circle that. You need to complete the diagram by circling an arrow in each box. The beekeeper adds oxalic acid to the beehive after 4 days. Varroa population, the mite, would probably decrease. We circle that arrow, and therefore the bee population would increase. So you need to circle those 3 arrows: decrease, decrease, increase to get credit. Give yourself +1 if you got it correct. 31. Based on the data provided, which explanation describes the effectiveness of this oxalic acid treatment every 18 days? Okay, so we want to look at these choices. Treatment would be effective because the number of living mites continues to decrease for several weeks after the exposure. That's incorrect. After several weeks, basically the population is back up to where it was. So that's incorrect when we look at the graph. 2, the treatment would not be effective because an individual mite would become resistant if they were treated frequently. This is gets to a common misconception, right? An individual mite isn't going to become resistant after it's exposed to this chemical. It either is born resistant or not. And so this is a common misconception that this is how natural selection works. So this is wrong. Individuals don't develop resistance or don't change their traits because there's some pressure. It just has to be a natural variation in the population. Number 3, the treatment would not be effective because varroa mites have a natural resistance, would survive and reproduce. Okay, looking good. That's natural selection. That's sort of a explanation of natural selection, how it relates to these mites. But let's check 4. The treatment would be effective because it gives mites enough time to learn to avoid hives that contain oxalic acid. This doesn't give us any, the reading in the graph doesn't give us any information about these mites learning about oxalic acid. So yeah, the correct answer is 3. Give yourself a point if you got it correct. And then finally, varroa mites can become dormant in cold months. So we have a little reading about seasons in these mites. It also tells you that an infestation rate above 5% in the fall reduces colony survival. So we got a lot going on in the graph. You really have to take some time and analyze it. These are honeybee and these mite populations over a year. Our x-axis gives us the months of the year. This y-axis is the bee population, and the key tells us bees are this lighter line. And the other y-axis is the mite population, and that's the darker line. So we want to think about what's going on. So bees populations is low in the winter, and then in the spring starts to increase, and then decreases in the fall, back down in the winter. The mite population follows a similar pattern, but it is delayed. The mites population doesn't really start increasing till later in the summer and peaks in the fall. Okay. We also have this information that at this point in June, there's 6 of these mites for every 100 bees. And in the fall, there's 35 mites for every 100 bees. Okay, so that's important. Let's get to the question now. Using evidence and reasoning, evaluate the claim that the year of a varroa mite, that the time of year that of the varroa mite treatment might determine whether a new ecosystem results in the following year. So again, what we're focused on here is about timing. So you can choose which claim, if you decide the claim is valid or invalid. Okay, to me, it seems like the claim is valid, but you can actually get credit if you said it's not valid. And it's valid and you need to make sure that you use evidence and reasoning. So you would just check a box, first of all. If you checked claim is valid, you need to provide evidence from the data and then the reasoning about why that makes sense scientifically. So if we look at the answer choices, treatment in the spring may not improve colony survival because a treatment lasts only 18 days and the infestation rate may be above 5% in the fall, which would reduce the bee population in the spring. So that would mean that the claim is valid, okay, that the time of the year is important. Or here's a simpler answer. The treatment in the fall will reduce infestation rate, which will not result in the death of the colony and will maintain biodiversity. So the timing is important. Okay, you might say if they are treated early in the year, it will have an effect, but because it's only a short-lasting effect, it won't actually impact it will impact the beehive because the fall is what's important for them. Or you might say this version, the simpler version, which I would say is that if you use the treatment in the fall, then you're going to reduce the mite population so that the colony can survive. You could say the claim is not valid. You could say time of the year will not affect the colony survival because we don't have information about that. So something along those lines, that we need more data to support that claim. Okay, that's the end of that cluster.